Stories of Being is a series of conversations with a range of inspiring humans whose approaches to life each offer an important piece of the puzzle for how we go about creating the fairer, more balanced, connected and beautiful world we long for. Each conversation explores a new perspective on how we view success, connection, power and progress, and offers inspiration and guidance as we collectively transition to more harmonious ways of being with ourselves, each other, and our shared home. In today's episode, I talk to Jess Neill. Jess is a personal trainer whose philosophy is all about working in sync with your cycle. In this conversation, we talk about the hormonal and energy fluctuations women may experience through the month, and ways to work with this rather than against it and, constantly fighting it, in order to reduce basically the shittiness and fatigue that not always, that may come with having a period. We talk about diet and exercise, and how that can impact how you feel, but also touch on other aspects such as, the content we consume, where we're putting our energy, what do we commit to, and how all of these decisions influence our overall well-being. I found it to be a really empowering conversation, and I think broadly it's kind of just about understanding our bodies, knowing our bodies, and working with our bodies to just feel the best, I guess, mentally and physically that we can. This was actually the first podcast I recorded, but the second last one that I'm releasing, so my schedule has not gone to plan. So it's maybe a bit iffy from my side, but Jess is awesome. Yeah, I just really love her approach, and I really hope you get something out of it. What you do with the training with your cycle and living with your cycle and all of that stuff is so important, and something that people don't necessarily even think about, if that makes sense.
It's one of those topics that it's almost like it's been taboo for a long time. Don't talk about your periods, don't show tampons when you walk into the bathroom. It's just like it's meant to be a non-existent thing, but it's 50% of the population have a period for 45 years of their life, or 35 years of their life. It's a long time.
It can affect you or one so much, but then when you actually realize there are these different stages or whatever, and you understand that, it's not as of a as big of a toll, if that makes sense, and you can sort of work with it rather than trying to fight it constantly.
It takes away, it's almost like we're gaslit, it's like we're told if you have a tampon, you're fine. You can just continue with life because there's no blood coming out. But the bleeding for most people is such a small part of what goes on every time they have a period. It's that whole monthly cycle. It can be a really big deal for some people, and the bleeding is just such a non-issue for a lot of us. It's
actually the time leading up to it that's the most challenging, whatever it is, the most challenging. But there's no conversation or awareness around what is actually happening, why it's happening, and then what you can actually do to help manage it or balance it, balancing your hormones.
I think a lot of that stems from the fact that even in the medical field and definitely in the fitness world, women have been seen as small men for a very long time. And so, men are a lot easier to study than women because their cycles of hormones and just everything is very predictable, and there's not a lot of variation. So they're really easy to study and get results from, whereas the amount of variables that come with having a menstrual cycle, it makes it really hard to study.
And even that, I think in itself, the fact that women are more cyclical, rather than waking up and every day sort of their bodies almost, or their hormones, I guess, are functioning in the same way. Women are so much more cyclical, and I think even knowing that is powerful and helpful.
takes away it just takes away those feelings of, am I crazy? Like, am I crazy for feeling this way, when some people just seem to push through everything and be fine all the time? And I think most of us actually aren't fine all the time. It's just not spoken about.
How did you end up, I guess, like in this space?
Yeah, definitely just the fact that, it started out as me, becoming a personal trainer and being a mum. A lot of my clientele were mums and women. And then, it's just over the course of the, 8 years that I've been doing personal training and mostly working with women during that time, you just notice patterns. Like, there are just, I can actually tell, when I've been working with a client for long enough, I can just tell when she's on her period. I'm like, we're having a period week. And she's like, how do you know? And it's like, it's just something that, I've learned that women really do need adjustments in their training. And yeah, that's kind of how it started, just me noticing that I was having to adjust my clients' programs, based on kind of where they are in their cycle. And it doesn't mean it's programmed automatically. It's just like on the day, I'm like, if they're like, I'm kind of the week before my period, I'm feeling really low energy, I have enough experience, I can just change it up on the fly. But I think for a lot of people who are, say, doing their own programming or following a program that's just, it's designed for men, and it's linear progression where you're meant to go for, 8 to 12 weeks with almost no break in between. And it just doesn't work that way for women. We kind of feel like we go 3 steps forward, 2 steps back every month.
And what was the reaction, I guess, that you had from women or like your clients when you started working with them and kind of their bodies?
I think a lot of people's views on personal trainers is the whole drop and give me 20 push-ups, that kind of thing, like go, go, go. And I definitely don't work that way. And to be honest, a lot of personal trainers don't work that way. But there is a real stigma around personal training. And I think that even just the fact that, adjusting a program, people are like, oh, okay, so I can actually come into the gym still when I'm on my period. I don't have to completely not train. I don't have to give up my session. I just need to modify it to match my energy levels on that day. And that's crux. That's all that cycle syncing and, training for your cycle is about. Like, it's about matching what's happening on the inside with what you're doing on the outside. Yeah.
If you view it, or you approach exercise and I guess health more broadly, which I guess we can talk about later, but if you approach it from like the cycle syncing point of view, you're more likely to be consistent. Like, I'm just thinking about myself. With my cycle, there'd be a period where I'd have heaps of energy and I'd go and I'd be super active and la. And then obviously I'd get the energy dip. So then I'd do nothing. So I felt like, I haven't followed through. Whereas if you're actually working with your cycle and you understand those energy highs and lows, you're more likely to follow through and be consistent with them exercise or workout plan or whatever it is that you have.
And that's exactly it. It's that especially the week or week and a half or 2 weeks after our period, depending how long your cycle is and how long until you ovulate. But there is that 1.5 to 2 week period right after our period where we can do 5-6 sessions a week and feel fine. And we should do that. We should utilize that energy while we have it, because, our hormones are working for us to help us build muscle. We've got more testosterone, we've got more estrogen. Not only that, but it's a time of the month when we feel more articulate and we feel more attractive. So we're going to be wanting to be out and about and socializing and being in group sessions and all that kind of stuff. And, it goes with this cycle. And that time of the month, people can often, they can eat their 3 meals a day, just veggies and, chicken breast, and they actually feel okay on that kind of diet and you can get through it. And then people they seem to hit this wall. And what's actually happening is that they're flipping over into their luteal phase where their hormones have changed and it's the second half of their cycle now. And suddenly they feel more hungry, they're more tired, their energy levels are lower, they're not feeling as sociable. You're also feeling maybe a little bit bloated, not feeling as, good in your gym clothes. All that's happening is that you're now in luteal phase. So what you now should be doing is switching up your gym sessions for a yoga session or a walk or, something a little bit more gentle and restorative. So it's not about not training. It's about the type of training that you're doing and understanding that time of the month, it's normal for those things to be happening, and you should eat a little bit more and, you know, move a little bit less in terms of the intensity that you're doing. And that, you know, knowing that, I think, can be quite empowering for a lot of women, knowing that, you know, you're not mad and that it's actually okay to back off a little bit in the second half of the month.
So do you mind just, I know, sorry, you just touched on it then, do you mind going through the 4 different stages and kind of what they entail, I guess?
Definitely. So the first part of the menstrual cycle is the menstruation phase. So that's when you're bleeding actively. Essentially, we say it's sort of when you need a tampon. So yeah, so menstrual phase, during this time, hormones are relatively flatlined. So hormones have really dropped for menstruation. And so if your hormones are nice and balanced and doing what they should be doing, energy shouldn't really be high, it shouldn't really be low, it should just be kind of normal level. Technically, menstruation is also part of follicular phase, but so, you know, you can kind of push hard if you have the energy during menstruation to go and exercise. If you have a nice light period and you don't get a lot of symptoms, you can absolutely train as though you're in the next phase. But, you know, my experience working with women, most of us don't really feel like doing much, especially the first couple of days of the period, you know, when you might be getting cramping or a sore lower back and just feeling a bit more sort of flatlined in terms of energy. So then we have the follicular phase, which is kind of last day of period up until ovulation. And follicular phase is where our estrogen and our testosterone start to rise. So those are the 2 sort of happy hormones in terms of the cycle. You know, they help us build muscle, they give us lots of energy. Estrogen actually makes your face shape change, makes you look more attractive. You don't bloat as much. So that's why, you know, if you always be out in your gym gear feeling really slim and toned, and that's usually during your follicular phase, and that's estrogen. So that's, you know, yeah, that's the best time to be sort of pushing yourself in terms of your, you know, training volume and, you know, how many sessions you're doing every week and how hard you're pushing. This is the time to kind of go for it. And it's the time when you feel like going for it too. So it makes sense. Yeah. And then the third phase is ovulation. So ovulation can be tricky for some people to track because it's not always at the same time every month, especially if you have hormone imbalance. And we're talking specifically women who are not on any hormonal birth control, because generally the pill will stop ovulation altogether. And that's how it stops you from getting pregnant. So speaking about naturally cycling women, ovulation phase is where you're going to probably feel the most sociable, the most attractive, the most energy. It's where sort of estrogen and testosterone peak, and then you'll ovulate, and then all your hormones take a big drop all of a sudden. So some people right after ovulation get a little bit of a dip in energy, but it comes back up pretty quickly. It's only for like a day or 2 after ovulation if you do feel it at all. Then after ovulation is the luteal phase, and it's actually the longest phase in the cycle, and it's the one where most of us tend to feel crappy. In luteal phase, estrogen does come back up again after ovulation, but progesterone rises to its highest during this phase of the cycle. And progesterone's job, it literally is put there so that you eat more and you move less. Yeah, its job is to make you feel more hungry, because what's happening is that your body's assuming that you'll get pregnant when you ovulate. It's like, okay, now we're getting ready for this egg to implant in the uterus. So we're building the uterine lining. We're getting you to eat some more because babies are energetically expensive to carry. We're going to get you to move less because we don't want to waste energy on unnecessary movement. So all of these things are literally happening because of progesterone. You know, there's other little hormones in there too, but the main player is progesterone in the luteal phase. And then, yeah, once your body realizes you're no longer pregnant, you're not pregnant, then all of those hormones drop and you menstruate, and then it all starts again.
And if we just almost listen to our body, we would actually probably be at our most optimum in terms of health and energy and things. It's just that we don't listen to it. So that's when we get probably even more fatigued and things like that.
Absolutely. There are a lot of gynecologists now calling the menstrual cycle the 6th vital sign, you know, because it's such an important part of our, you know, just our body as a you know, women in their reproductive years. And we just don't listen to it, you know. And sadly, a lot of, you know, when we go, like I went to the gynecologist just months ago because I still get hormonal acne breakouts, which I'm actively working on. They've gotten a lot better since I started cycle syncing, for sure. but they still happen. So I was like, oh, I went to my gyno and I was like, hey, I'd really like to get like a hormone test just to see what's happening at the time of the month when I get breakouts. Do I have too much estrogen? Do I have not enough progesterone? What's happening? And she kind of looked at me and she went, well, look, we can do the test, but all that's going to happen if we do find a hormone imbalance is that we'll put you on the pill. And I was like, it's kind of the default response from doctors for women who have hormonal issues. And so then we have to, resort to going to holistic naturopaths and nutritionists and people who don't necessarily have a medical degree to look after this most precious part of our body,
Why do you think it's not explored and there's just this one sort of default go on the pill? Like, is it just because there's no interest in it or education? Or, do you kind of have any thoughts on why that is?
I think there's not enough interest in it, right? So I said earlier that, women were seen as small men for a very long time. And, I know that there's a guy who's called the father of gynecology. And he's sort of, he's the one responsible for the creation of the speculum and like cervical biopsies and things like that, all of which he did experimenting on Black slave women without any anesthesia. So that's where a lot of our, healthcare as women comes from, things like that. And, since then, it hasn't changed very much. They still don't give us painkillers for cervical biopsies where they literally stick something up there and take a chunk out of your cervix. They don't give us painkillers for pap smears. They don't give us painkillers for IUD insertions because there's just this view that we don't feel pain the way men do. And I think that, there's just not enough talk about it to make it something that they study, with men. Can you imagine if men had to have something shoved up their hoo-ha without any painkillers? There would be, very quickly, there would be sedation offered and things like that.
That point about women just being perceived as small men, I think it's like because so many, say, gynecologists or whatever they are, I don't know what the percentages are, but a lot of the time they're male. So there's no understanding of what it means to be a woman in that sense. So there's no exploration, like you just said.
Exactly. I actually read an article many years ago that talked about, Viagra, which was originally created as heart medication and then was discovered to help, men get erections. However, it was also discovered to significantly reduce severe menstrual cramping. Which route did they go down to market it? It's because, it's always leaned that way. And it's another reason why, in terms of my industry, I get a lot of kind of not necessarily haters, but people just coming and going, well, where is your evidence that cycle syncing works? And I say, well, where's the evidence that it doesn't work? There is none because there's been no studies done on it. The only evidence, that you can't say something doesn't work if it's never been studied. And the only times things in the fitness industry get studied is if there is enough mainstream interest in it. Like keto diet came out and was hugely popular for a decade before it got studied properly. But it worked for a lot of people. It's one of those things where you can't just come along and say it doesn't work just because you can't find a study on it. You have to have a study that says it doesn't work for you to say that it doesn't work. All we've got to go off is anecdotal evidence. And I can tell you pretty much every woman that I speak to, particularly ones who don't take the pill, can relate to the fact that they feel different at different times of the month.
Two things. Number one, there's no studies on it because it's not seen as a priority, kind of because of what we just spoke about. And also, this obsession with like studies and data and blah, blah, blah. Obviously that is like super important and helpful, but also how someone feels and the anecdotal evidence is just as powerful, especially in this sort of situation, I think, where it is very individual and ebbs and flows, and it is actually about feeling. That's actually what is powerful.
Yeah. And that's where I use the word gaslighting a lot in this, this industry, because it's like I feel so crappy the week leading up to my period. Like my energy is very low. Like I just, I don't get PMS like I used to, but like there's definitely changes in my energy levels and my overall mood. And I don't really want to do much except for kind of watch a movie in the evening. Like I don't feel like being up and cooking. Like that's where we get more takeaway this time of the month. Like it's just, those things. But for someone to then turn around and be like, no, go train hard, like go do a HIIT class. You're absolutely fine. There's no evidence to show that you need to back off your training. And I'm like, is it really the right kind of thing to be saying to people that feel that way? Like,
you then feel almost crapper for longer because, like I said, you haven't listened to yourself and your body. And for me, like I remember for so long, exactly like you just said with the 4 stages, it's like clockwork. Like, oh my God, I'm feeling so social and active and la la la. And then, oh my God, like I feel like crap. I have no energy. I don't want to see anyone. And I actually always thought, like, oh, what is wrong with me? Like a week ago, I wanted to go out and whatever, and now I just want to be kind of at home or, take it easy. And that actually was super disempowering. Whereas knowing that it's because of these phases and these hormones is so much more empowering, because you can then sort of, I guess, like live your life in a way according to that, or just with that in mind.
100%. It gives you permission to rest. Like it gives you permission to do less, which I think, especially in this day and age, as women, we work full time, we're mums, we often care for our partners, in a lot of ways. Like there's so much more that we're doing these days compared with, say, a 1950s housewife who was home all day and that was her only job, was to look after the kids in the house. We're doing all that plus working full-time jobs, and trying to maintain a social life and, exercise. It's like, I think just taking off some of that expectation when we're not feeling our best, it, as you said, it's super empowering. It really does allow us to make better choices for ourselves and to feel better.
And then with the 4 stages, you kind of mentioned like different types of exercise to do within those different stages based on your hormones and kind of where you're at. Is there anything else in terms of like nutrition or rest or whatever it is within each stage that helps support, I guess, the hormones or what's happening in those stages?
Yeah, definitely. So, but particularly important if you get PMS type symptoms, to be conscious of your eating in a lot of ways. I'm a big fan of talking to people about what you can add to your diet or add to your regime rather than what you should take away or what you should avoid, because I don't really think that we should avoid anything specific. I think that it's better to just add in what we can when we need it. So, menstrual phase, you'll start at the beginning and work our way down. Menstrual phase, you're losing blood, energy might be a little bit low. So this is where we want to prioritize iron-rich foods. So, your red meats, your spinach, broccoli, those kinds of foods. And in Chinese medicine, for the womb during menstruation, they like warming foods. So, you can just Google, and there's heaps of articles online about what foods are warming and what foods are cooling. But sort of warming foods, so I really like casseroles and bolognese and, foods that have red meat in them, but that are quite easy to digest and quite nourishing. You can add lots of veggies to them, that kind of stuff. But you want to be sort of, it's all about supporting the womb during that time because it's shedding. Follicular phase is the fun one for most people because, we're always about trying to eat as healthy as possible and, stick with our 3 meals a day and avoid snacking. And follicular phase is usually the time where most people feel like that's easy to do. You crave sugar less because you don't need that extra energy. You can kind of live off the rabbit food diet pretty comfortably and like feel good about it. And like, I'm nailing this. I'm nailing my diet. I haven't had any sugar cravings, like all that. But this is the time where estrogen in your body is rising and rising and rising. And our liver's job is to detox and flush estrogen. So we want to come out of follicular phase without a massive amount of excess estrogen in our system. And so we want to eat foods that support the liver during this time. So that's a lot of, raw veggies and especially cruciferous veggies. So your cabbage, your kale, spinach, broccoli, those kinds of vegetables. Our digestion tends to handle raw foods better at this time. And it works a little bit more, well. It works better. So yeah, raw foods can be eaten a little bit more easily. Yeah, keep it lean and light and fresh in that phase. Ovulation's pretty much the same thing. You could add even more raw veggies around that time just to really get rid of that like peak of estrogen. And then luteal phase is the one, unfortunately, it's the one where we feel the crappiest, but it's also the longest phase in the cycle. If we are too low in progesterone or too high in estrogen, that's where we're going to feel PMS symptoms. So you're going to get the tender breasts, you're going to get the mood swings, the bloating, all of those things. That all comes from the imbalance between progesterone and estrogen. So if you're not flushing estrogen correctly after follicular phase, you'll have too much estrogen compared with progesterone. And, conversely, if you're not producing enough progesterone, then your estrogen will be too high by comparison. So you just want to be eating foods that are easy to digest and really nutritious, like full of nutrients. So your cooked veggies are going to be the best for you in this phase. An interesting thing about progesterone is it makes us a little bit insulin resistant. And insulin resistant, if anyone doesn't know, it's when we eat food, we get a rise in blood sugar, and it's insulin's job to take that sugar out of our blood and place it into the cells so that they can use it for energy. And so what happens when you become insulin resistant is that the insulin doesn't work against the glucose. So your blood sugar is spiked, the insulin's released, but it can't do anything with the blood sugar. So your cells don't receive energy. And so your body signals to you that you're hungry again or that you need some sugar because you haven't had any energy put in, but your blood sugar is already high. So then you eat more and the blood sugar rises again, but the insulin still can't do anything. So it kind of goes on this vicious cycle. And that's why a lot of the time we get those sugar cravings in the luteal phase, because we are a bit insulin resistant. So it's a good idea to increase fats during the luteal phase. So eat more nuts and seeds and olive oil and avocado, almost like go Mediterranean style diet. Yeah, so reduce your carbohydrate intake a little bit. Go for definitely your low GI carbs, like your sweet potato and your brown rice and things, but really try to increase your healthy fats during this phase. We also need about 300 more calories per day during this phase compared with the follicular phase, which is why we get that big boost in appetite all of a sudden and we cannot live off the rabbit food diet anymore. Yeah, so it's a combination of things in that part of our cycle that make us crave all that chocolate and just get those ups and downs with the energy and the mood swings and blah, blah, blah. So, eating more and eating more healthy fats. So include like oily fish, things like that. Just, I like to sort of plug a Mediterranean diet during that time. Drop. Also the number one, prescription for insulin resistance, if people are pre-diabetic, for example, the doctors will say exercise, because exercise will draw glucose out of your bloodstream to be used in your muscles. So this is why it's important to not exercise while you're in luteal phase, but to change up your exercise so that you're not overdoing it, but it's still important to move, probably even more so during the luteal phase compared with the follicular phase, because it will help your body utilize the blood glucose that's in your system and not make you so insulin resistant. And that's why I really like strength training during the luteal phase. So it's low volume training. People think of strength training as like pushing yourself to the heaviest you can do, but it's not. It's the difference in volume. So where you're trying to build muscle, you're doing lots of reps and lots of sets and lots of weight. Where you're trying to build strength, you're actually doing less reps and less sets. So overall less volume, but because you're only doing maybe 4, 5, 6 reps, generally you can lift more weight at those reps than you could for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 reps. So you're lifting more weight, but for a lot less volume. You'll still feel like you've done something, but the sessions are quicker. They're not as taxing on the body. You're not pumping cortisol through your system. Like your nervous system gets a bit of a workout, but it's nothing like doing a HIIT session or like doing high volume weight session. So yeah, generally that's how I would adjust clients' training during that time, get them to eat a little bit more for that, especially the last week leading up to the period, eat more healthy fats and, switch to lower reps, lower sets and just like if they can. Yeah.
And then this is, I guess, so I don't forget 2 questions, but do you think, I remember seeing something like a video you made that said like PMS or bad PMS it doesn't necessarily have to be the norm. Do you think people get bad PMS because they're not kind of eating how you just described based on their cycle? Like, why do you think maybe people get more severe PMS than maybe is normal? That's the first question. And then the second one, you mentioned cortisol before. Often my anxiety or my stress will be the worst just before my period, I think. And I'm wondering if that's has to do with hormones, and then also if there's, I guess, things you can do in that time to sort of reduce that stress or anxiety that might come at that stage of someone's cycle.
Yeah, definitely. So they kind of intertwine, the PMS and the cortisol. Cortisol, it wreaks havoc on a woman's system. Like we're not small men. Men can handle a lot more cortisol in their system than we can. And it's because of the sort of delicate balance and cycles of hormones that we have. So as I said, PMS is definitely not normal. We literally shouldn't feel anything, like definitely different like energy levels, but we shouldn't be feeling breast tenderness, severe cramping, mood swings. Like all that stuff is not normal. It's not actually something we're supposed to feel in the lead up to our period. We do feel it. It's common, but it's not normal. And I think it all does kind of intertwine with stress. And when I say stress, stress causes cortisol to be pumped through our system. When I say stress, we have to remember that stress is literally everything that we are doing in our life that withdraws from our energy bank account. So stress is, your kids crying all night, not sleeping, it's fights with your partner, it's stress at work, it's money stresses, but it's also the type of exercise you're doing, whether you're eating enough, because under eating, and a lot of women under eating is very stressful to your body. Not giving your body enough calories, enough nutrients is really stressful to your body. So your body, if you're not eating enough, as I talked about the blood glucose, your body needs energy. And if you're not eating enough to provide a constant stream of glucose into your blood for your cells to use as energy, your body's pumping cortisol in your system, because cortisol will force your liver to convert proteins and fats into glucose to be used as energy. So under eating is really stressful for your body. And when you undereat, your intestines don't work properly. They're a smooth muscle. So if they're not getting exercise, they become weak and they don't work as well. So, then you're not absorbing nutrients the way you should be, even when you are eating, because they're just not getting worked enough to actually break down the foods properly and absorb the nutrients from it. So like there are so many things that cause stress to our body. And some of them we can't control, but there are some that we absolutely can control. And I think that that's where people need to understand the importance of knowing what is causing stress to your body and controlling what you can control to reduce stress to your body. You can't control your kids, you can't control your partner, you can't always control your job. Money stresses happen, but the things you can control is making sure that you're eating well and eating enough, making sure that you're not adding stress to your life through exercise if it's not the right time for it. Making sure you sleep well if you have the ability to do that. Don't sit up scrolling on your phone before bed. Stop consuming crap on social media that makes you feel shitty. Stop watching the news if it makes you feel crappy and you're just constantly watching stories of people drowning or like wars overseas. Can be important to know, but stop consuming it if it's adding stress to your life. There is lots that we can control, and a lot of that wreaks havoc on our system as women. It is the cortisol, and cortisol has been directly linked in men and women. There are lots of studies on that, has been directly linked with visceral fat storage, so increased visceral fat storage, but especially for women. So that's that deep intra-abdominal fat that coats our organs and our arteries. And you can be very slim and have a very low level of body fat and still have very high levels of visceral fat. And that's all down to the types of foods that you're eating and the stress that you're putting your body through.
What you just spoke about is like, in terms of stress and where stress comes from, is like this really looking at health and fitness and I guess, your cycle in a way as like a 360 thing rather than just, it's what I eat or it's how I exercise or whatever. It's like literally everything we do and surround ourselves with can have an impact on sort of our health and well-being. So it's like really looking at all facets of your life to then try and obviously there's things you can't control and we live in a particular world and whatever, but just being more conscious of like how all of these things impact us rather than just what you exercise and how you eat.
You know, food and exercise are two of the things that are easiest to control, you know. So, but the thing is, people really like to exercise hard. People like to, you know, especially women, they like to undereat because it's what we're taught to be small and skinny, you know, from day dot. You know, I grew up with articles in Cosmo magazine. It was like, look at her beach body, how gross she looks. And it was always like, looking at it now, it'd just be women that have had a couple of kids and just enjoying life on the beach, like the way that I look or the way that, you know, my auntie looks. Like, it's just, we grow up being, you know, just fed that kind of stuff. And food and exercise are really easy for us to control. But there are other things that I think people forget about that they can also control, like what you're consuming on social media, like the fact that you shouldn't be watching telly or scrolling on your phone until the late hours of the night. Like, you know, and people forget, like, having a day off, if you want to relax properly. Sitting and watching TV is not relaxing for your brain. Scrolling on your phone is not relaxing for your brain. Your body is at rest, but your brain is not. And all of our hormones and our stress, and it all starts here. Your brain is what triggers hormones to be produced, right? So if your brain thinks that your body is underfed, it produces cortisol. If your brain watches something stressful on the news, it produces cortisol. Like, it literally continuously puts you into this state of fight and flight, which is great if you're trying to outrun a bull in a field that's about to gore you. But when you're sitting and watching the news, do you really need to be in fight and flight mode? You know?
Our bodies, I don't know if this is true, but like, because the like news cycle is 24/7 and, you know, you can constantly be consuming content, we're probably, or a lot of the time, massive generalization, but still, you know, a lot of the time just living in flight or fight because we're just always surrounded by information and bad things or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. Like, even just, you know, a lot of my For You page on TikTok is women's issues, feminists talking about women's issues, and it's, you know, it's such an important thing to know about, but also like seeing them respond to these these heinous comments that men write on their pages, and it's just like, oh, it's just a stressful thing to consume, you know. And so I try to avoid it where I can, but sometimes it's unavoidable, and that's, you know, that's the danger of just sitting and scrolling social media. It's so easy to just, you know, I remember something popped up on my For You page. It was just a story this guy was telling about a woman in the 80s at a beach in South Australia who got eaten by a great white shark, and he went into this massive detail about how it all happened, and it was in front of her kids. And that night I had nightmares about shark attacks, and I had almost no sleep that night. And like, you know, that one little, it was like a 90-second clip, but it ruined my whole night of sleep. I still think about it weeks later, that, you know, how horrible that must be for her kids. So it's just, you know, you have to remember that it all kind of sits in there. And every time I think about it, I can feel that my heart rate goes up a little bit. And all I do is put myself in my kids' shoes and go, oh my God, it must have been so horrible if they saw their mum, you know, like, and it's just, you're instantly in fight or flight just from that 90-second clip, you know. It's just, one of the best skills I learned was something called mindfulness practice. And, you know, it's a practice that gets you to, it's a form of meditation, but it gets you to actively, you know, anchor yourself using your breath back into your own body if you're having these, you know, intrusive thoughts or thoughts about something negative, and just to kind of learn to view your thoughts and things that are happening as like leaves floating by on a stream or clouds floating by in the sky. So you're not actually you're not those feelings. You are feeling those feelings, but you are not those feelings, and they pass by. And I think that's, you know, that kind of thing is a really important skill to have, so that when you are having those moments, you can just stop and breathe yourself out of those feelings a little bit.
We've just bombarded with all of these positive and negative things that we probably just take on and carry.
there are certain topics that I think it's important for everyone to understand where their limits are. You know, I have certain topics that I will not hear anything about, like human trafficking, child trafficking, that kind of stuff. Like I just cannot consume because it eats me alive. And I know that about myself, and I would just not ever stop thinking about those stories. And it's probably because I have kids, and I just my kids in those kids' shoes, or myself in those parents' shoes, and just think, oh my God, you know, how do they ever survive that? Like, you know, just that kind of thing. So just knowing, you know, enough about yourself to pull yourself away from things that you shouldn't be listening to. But a lot of people don't even have those skills, you know, and I think it's just this culmination of stress and poor diet and poor sleep and the wrong kind of exercise at the wrong time. It really compounds into these just PMS symptoms. And for some people, the PMS is only minor. For others, it's debilitating. They get PMDD. They're not themselves for half of every single month. Like it's, it's a whole, it's like half of your reproductive years living in a miserable state, you know?
And so what would be your, I guess, advice, or for someone who has no idea about their cycle, or living with it, or exercising with it, or, just being aware of it, where do you think like the first place to start is for someone who's wanting to be a bit more in sync or have more awareness about, their body and their cycle?
Yeah, definitely tracking your cycle. So there's heaps of apps. One of my favorites is called MyFlow, Flow app, FLO. It was created by a woman called Alisa Vitti, and she's one of the first women who ever wrote about cycle syncing. I think she's actually trademarked the term cycle syncing. She was like the first one to ever sort of talk about it. So her app is amazing. It's the one that I use. It's free, and it gives you lots of little tidbits based on where you are, like what kind of exercise you should be doing, what kind of food you should be eating. She's a nutritionist and she's a biologist, so she's got a lot of good information on there. She's written a couple of books as well, but I would definitely start with tracking your cycle. Just a small anecdotal example. I thought, I went to see a nutritionist because of my acne problems, and she was like, oh, so your periods? I was like, no, they're super irregular. I never know when they're coming. Like they're all over the shop. And so she got me to start tracking my period. This was like 4 or 5 years ago. I started tracking and realized they come every 28 days on the dot. I was just looking at the dates on the calendar rather than every sort of week ahead. Like it was just little things like that. Like I'm like, oh, actually my cycle's super regular. So that's not one of my issues, So I think getting an understanding of what's happening in your cycle will just give you clues as to what's going on. The apps, you could even just keep a diary, mood, energy levels, like did you do training, what kind of foods did you feel like you ate, were you able to stick to your healthy diet, or did you feel like you went off the rails and binged on sugar? And you'll start to see patterns that you'll be like, oh my God, I had the biggest sugar binge, really tired today, blah blah blah, and then period, and okay, so it's always right before my period. I think that's definitely the most empowering thing you can do, is just track your cycle. I have a couple of clients who actually track their ovulation. There's one app called Natural Cycles. It's a Swedish company, and they're actually the first company to ever be FDA approved as a form of birth control. So you can purchase a ring. It's about $250, and you wear this ring, and it basically just Bluetooths your temperature to the app every single minute of every single day. So it can tell you when you're about to ovulate. So you just avoid sex. And so, and a couple of my clients have been using it quite successfully. Obviously, like with everything, there's room for error, and, different things in your life, stress and whatnot can make you ovulate at different times. But in general, if you're going to ovulate, your body gives you signs and signals that you're about to ovulate. So even if it doesn't happen at the same time every month, you'll still know when it is about to happen.
Yes. And I think like once you've done it maybe for a few months, it all makes sense. Like I remember every time I got my period, I was like, oh, that's why I was doing X, Y, Z. And literally it was the same thing every single month, but I just didn't put it together. It took so long to
mine's the backache. I was like, I must have done something in training. My back's really sore, and then period would come 2 days later. Oh, that's why.
And like you said, once you have that information, then that's the starting point to then changing your training and diet and, adding in all of the extra, bits and pieces.
100%. Yeah. I have a girlfriend who's she's in the dating scene. She's on a lot of dating apps at the moment. And every time she gets close to her period, she'll delete them all. I'm sick of men, screw them all, not doing this anymore. And then as soon as she's done with her period, she's back on there. It's really fun to watch. She really does.
Yeah, I keep saying the word and it's a bit of a cliched word, but it's so empowering. And I think it's so cool that you're in this space and you're sharing this and you're helping people just, yeah, like almost start to like and love their period and cycle, you know, which traditionally it's been the complete opposite. So it's a really amazing thing that you're doing and yeah, what you're offering.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, it's nice that I can, you know, with social media, we can bring it to so many more people now. You know, it's a big wide world out there. So it's just about starting to spread the word. And, you know, it is starting to pop up a lot more on the social feeds. I'm seeing more and more people talk about it and, you know, talk about cycle syncing. And you're always going to have the people that insist that it, you know, you don't have to do it because there's no evidence to show that it works. But when you can show me the evidence that it doesn't work, then I'll listen to you. You know what I mean? But until then, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I think that, you know, most of the people who do live and train in sync with their cycle really feel the difference and, you know, it really positively impacts lives.